This video will cover Chapter 16, which covers the American Judiciary. The learning objectives will be explain the concept of judicial review, summarize the development of the federal courts, discuss the structure, jurisdiction, and operation of the federal courts, explain how the federal courts exercise power and the checks on judicial, and also explain how federal courts exercise power and the checks on judicial power. So, the addition of a national federal judiciary system was a key change from the Articles of Confederation. With the Constitution, you have a dual system of courts, system of courts at the federal and state level. Most countries, however, just have state courts plus a federal Supreme Court. This has not given us the fact that we have so many courts isn't much of a surprise, considering the fact that we have a very adversarial culture and thus have one of the highest lawyer per capita counts in the world. So, judicial review is the extraordinary power to determine the constitutionality of an act of government, whether executive, legislative, or judicial. If an act is judged unconstitutional, it is considered null and void. The Supreme Court firmly established this implied power in a unanimous 1803 Marbury v. Madison decision, because the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court at the time, John Marshall, was a nationalist and judicial activist, and thus believed that the law is what the Supreme Court says it is. So he was of course not a strict constructionist. This invocation of judicial review helped expand the powers of the federal courts. Now, FYI, sometimes conservatives are judicial activists, but often liberals are actually judicial activists today. So, judicial review has roughly overturned federal law 160 times. This is different from the United Kingdom, where the parliament is supreme. Plus, U.S. courts have overturned 1,300 state laws and many executive orders. So a judge decides based on a variety of factors, including facts to the case, relevant precedents. This is known as the concept of stare decisis, or let it stand, in which a federal court judge will let a precedent case help determine his judgment on a case. However, it doesn't always happen. For example, Brown versus the Board of Education helped overturn the infamous Plessy versus Ferguson decision of separate but equal. So they also examine this text of the Constitution and or statutes and or regulations. They also consider history, tradition, purpose, and consequences, judicial philosophy, as well as an infinitely complex evolving combination of the above. The truth is that judicial interpretation and decisions often shape and really do make law. This is known as common law or judge-made law versus statute law, which is usually made by Congress. So judicial philosophy tends to fall into one of two categories. You have the concept of judicial restraint, in which the practitioners of this idea believe that they should be constrained by the original intent of the text. They are, in other words, they are clause-bound textualists. They are heavily reliant on precedent and leave lawmaking to the elected legislature. They are also known as strict constructionists and are usually Republicans conservatives like Scalia, Gorsuch, and Roberts. Judicial activists have a broader view of judicial power, and they see the Constitution as a living document, subject to reevaluation as times, values, and customs change. They are also known as liberal constructionists, and are usually Democrats. For example, the Warren Court of the 1950s and the 1960s. So the founding fathers initially did not expect courts to play a significant role in public policy. Just look at how long Article 3 of the Constitution is compared to Article 2 and Article 1. Article 1 and Article 2 are much longer, especially Article 1. Alexander Hamilton once described it as the least dangerous branch. The courts were assumed to apply existing laws rather than making it. However, that has changed significantly. During the John Marshall Court, the Supreme Court affirmed the principle of national supremacy over states' rights. You saw this with Marbury versus Madison, which helped create the idea of judicial review, and also McCulloch versus Maryland, in which Marshall declared that because of the necessary and proper clause in the Constitution, the U.S. Congress had the implied power to set up a national bank. Under the Taney Court, it shifted. Under the Taney Court, the Supreme Court, reaffirmed the idea of states' rights, especially the concept of slavery. A little FYI, for future reference in American history, until very recently, the whole concept of states' rights was practically always used to justify racism and or racism, first of slavery, then with the continuation of segregation and Jim Crow. You see this most clearly with the infamous Dred Scott case, in which basically Taney says, black people, they do not deserve equal citizenship, nor do they have the same rights as white people. This decision, by the way, was incredibly disastrous in the fact that it would only inflame sectarian tensions and push the United States into the abyss that will eventually lead to the Civil War. Just on the bright side, the Supreme Court actually managed to learn its mistakes from this decision, and the Senate usually tries to avoid making decisions so flagrantly terrible, although Korematsu versus the United States might dispute that argument. So, from the Civil War to the early New Deal, you have the Supreme Court shifting its focus to economic matters and government regulation. And this is kind of another major boo-boo by the Supreme Court. The 14th Amendment was originally supposed to be about protecting black people, but the Supreme Court, mostly dominated by Southerners, said, not going to apply that, and we're just going to interpret it as protecting private property, including that of corporate persons. They struck down many laws intended to regulate businesses, and this was actually interesting, an example of judicial activism by conservative courts. They banned the income tax and supported strike busting, child labor, segregation, and voter suppression. Not exactly a very nice period in the Supreme Court's history, but they did at least support some regulations, but rather inconsistently. They really got into the weeds of reasonable versus unreasonable regulation, and as a result, you often saw some contradictory Supreme Court decisions. So, now this would change again with the New Deal. FDR attempted court packing to get his New Deal laws enacted, because the conservative Supreme Court would always stonewall his New Deal programs. However, now despite the massive backlash to stop FDR from doing this, the mere threat of court packing basically made the Supreme Court change its heart and start supporting New Deal programs. They allowed the executive and the legislature to regulate business, and they turned all of its focus towards protecting personal liberties, specifically with the Bill of Rights. The Warren Court would end up becoming the most activist court ever. From the Eisenhower administration to through the civil rights period, as the Warren Court would become very proactive in protecting civil rights. However, from 1992 to now, you do see this is basically, by the way, this would characterize the time period from 1936 to 1992. However, from 1992 to now, you have a move. The pendulum starts swinging back to restoring states' rights after national domination. This would help rebalance federalism a tiny bit. For example, the U.S. versus Lopez case, again, another one of the 15 SCOTUS cases that you need to memorize, in which the Supreme Court decided that not everything would classify as interstate commerce. In the case of this court case, it concerned guns in schools. The Supreme Court also decreed that Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act could not force states to expand Medicare via fiscal blackmail. And today's issue is dealing with commandeering, specifically with the issue of sanctuary cities, and quite potentially with the coronavirus outbreak. The current president's push to open the states, but many states adamantly refusing to reopen. So, if you want to know, FYI, this is actually a very important document, one of the important documents you need to know for the AP exam, Federalist Number 78, which deals with the courts. According to Federalist Number 78, judges are to hold their office during good behavior, and life tenure is considered an excellent barrier to the encroachments and oppressions of the representative body. As a result, the judiciary, from the nature of its functions, will always be the least dangerous. It can't be tampered with by the executive or legislature, yet at the same time, it has no influence over either the sword or the purse. It just judges. Now, unfortunately, due to the weak powers of the judiciary, it is in continual jeopardy of being overpowered, awed, or influenced by its coordinate branches. As a result, this is why you have the whole permanent. This is why you have the whole permanent office thing, so as to prevent the courts from being tampered with. Periodical appointments, according to Federal 78, would be in some way or other be fatal to their necessary independence. And also, temporary duration in office would naturally discourage talented characters from quitting a lucrative line of practice to accept a seat on the bench, which would have a tendency to throw the administration of justice into hands less able and less qualified to conduct it with utility and dignity. So as we can see, basically during the pre-New Deal era, economic laws were frequently overturned, but then that kind of diminished with New Deal. Now you do see a brief peak during the 70s and during the Reagan administration, but it kind of declines down by the time the Obama administration comes around. By the time the beginning of the Obama administration, civil liberties on the other hand, is the reverse. Initially, the Supreme Court just didn't give a crap about civil rights. However, especially during the civil rights era in the Warren Court, you got this huge peak of the U.S. Supreme Court overturning laws that they viewed would infringe on civil liberties. But of course, once the Warren Court ended and the court became more conservative during the Reagan administration, you see a major drop-off, as well as being more conservative during the Nixon administration. So, we do see that courts are becoming more politicized, and the fact that there's a decline in federal appeals court nominee, the fact that we see a decline in the federal appeals court nominee confirmation rate. The nuclear option, which was invoked on April of 2019 to speed things up, basically it said that the Senate only requires a slight majority in order to confirm a Supreme Court justice. You also get longer confirmation hearings. Now, as to why, well, federal judges are making more policy decisions, and as a result, nomination process becomes longer, and it becomes more ideological and more uncertain. You also have extraordinary back and forth between Trump and Roberts on the whole concept of Obama judges. Trump accuses Trump, as usual, accuses the court of being a deep state, and then Roberts like, oh heck no, we're judges. We don't politicize us. So as a result, we see throughout the presidential administrations, we do see a decline in the general decline in confirmation rates. However, they generally still tend to be pretty high. Now, interestingly, I'm actually wondering why George H.W. Bush's was significantly lower than the Reagan's. Actually, this is personal, and I wonder why Carter's was so high, considering the fact that he was not exactly as well liked as, say, Reagan. You also get a significant increase in the time in the confirmation hearing process. In the confirmation process, the amount of time it takes from hearing to confirmation has significantly increased. So, the Constitution established the Supreme Court and empowered Congress to create lower federal courts as necessary. You have two kinds of federal courts: constitutional, regular, or Article III courts, and special, legislative, or Article I courts. This basically breaks down, which types of courts fall into special courts or constitutional courts. This also, explains the process of how lower federal court cases can be filtered through the lower court system up to the national judiciary. This is a nice little breakdown of the district of the district boundaries as well as the circuit boundaries. I live in Southern Ohio, so I would therefore be part of the Southern District of the Sixth Circuit. It's quite interesting how some of these are. It's kind of interesting how some of these are organized, if you ask me. Some of these kind of just, some of these are often based on geographic regions. Like, obviously this is the West. This is like, the plain. This is like, the Great Plains. This is like, the Southwest. Although I'm interested, I wonder why they say the group Louisiana and Missouri with Texas, considering the fact that these two are really deep South states. So I don't know why they were not clumped in with these guys. I actually wonder why Kentucky and Tennessee were lumped in with Ohio and Michigan, considering the fact these two are great. It would be more logical to group these, in my personal opinion, it would be more logical to group these two guys with these guys. But that's just my personal opinion. So this is a little as a result, as you can imagine, because of the fact that these are often carved along state lines, some circuits are more conservative or more liberal than others. Unsurprisingly, the 5th and 11th circuits are very conservative. However, the 9th and 1st are quite left leaning. As a result, because of the whole circuit, the circuits being different, because of the whole political difference in the circuits, you have to get some contradictory decisions. For example, the 5th district might uphold very strict abortion laws, but the 9th district might strike those down. So all federal judges, whether they are in the constitutional or special courts, are nominated and appointed by the president with the advice and consent of the Senate. All constitutional court judges serve during good behavior, i.e. for life, and special courts judges usually serve for 8 to 15 years. Now the SCOTUS and constitutional court life tenure is quite controversial because of the fact that because they serve life, whichever Supreme Court justice of a president picks and is confirmed, those judges will have a very long-lasting influence for decades to come. That's why Republicans were so obsessed with getting Gorsuch and Kavanaugh onto Supreme Court, because they were both conservative, relatively young for Supreme Court justices, and as a result would be able to serve for decades to come, and thus impose Republican ideals even on future Democrat presidents. So far, there have been four women, 2 blacks, and 1 Hispanic. So, not exactly the most diverse. But on the bright side, there are no Protestants in court today. So it's becoming a lot less waspy, as, there are right now 5 Catholics and 4 Jews. So religiously, it's becoming more diverse, but in terms of gender and ethnicity, not so much. So the United States is always the prosecutor in federal court in federal criminal cases. For example, like bank robbery, counterfeiting, kidnapping, tax evasion, and terrorism. Civil cases involve non-criminal matters such as contract dispute or a suit where a plaintiff seeks damage or torts money, essentially. Sometimes the United States is involved in this as a civil litigant, either as a plaintiff or defendant, when it waives sovereign immunity. Basically, sovereign immunity says you can't sue the United States government without its consent. Now, almost all district court decisions are final, as only a small percentage of the decisions are accepted for appeal. Court of Appeals, if they accept the appeal, review the arguments, record briefs, etc. from the tribal district court. They do not retry the case. Instead, now they do not usually try to retry the case. They just try to, make a decision. Usually it is a 3-judge panel that decides, and once an appeals court makes a decision, it is almost always final. However, if you want to know, by the way, appeals court means appellate court, but also means circuit court. So those terms often are changed with each other. So, federal jurisdiction is based on subject matter and parties involved. The subject matter will be constitutional questions like civil rights, federal laws, or treaties. Parties involved are usually the federal government itself or federal agencies or officers, as well as foreign or interstate issues. Otherwise, the state courts have jurisdiction. So, sometimes you have jurisdiction that's exclusive, in which only the federal or state courts can be involved. That's just a local bank robbery, which will almost always be in a state court or some sort. But a counterfeiting case will always be in a federal court. Now, sometimes you have concurrent ones, in which prosecutor or defendant in a case can pick federal versus state courts on some topics. They usually go for which one will get them the most money. For example, civil suits simple suits across state lines can cost well over $75,000. So now an original the jurisdiction is in which the 94 federal district courts actually hear trials for the first time. An appellate jurisdiction is when the 12 courts of appeals, aka circuit courts, made sure that the district courts act in accord with applicable law. Basically, they will strike down any decision by the district courts if they find they were acting unconstitutionally. However, they will not make a case. They will not make a decision of who loses or who wins the case. The Supreme Court acts almost exclusively as an appeals court, with 1 or 2 original cases trials a year. Note that states also have their own trial, appellate, and Supreme Courts. So judges are selected usually based on judges are usually selected based on party background or prior rulings, although several judicial selections were surprises. In order to ensure that they will act accordingly, people who like the politicians like senators and presidents who appoint and approve of the nominee, they usually look at litmus test issues like abortion to see where they stand. For example, Trump's candidates came from a conservative think tank's recommendation, the Federalist think tank. Now, interesting. Now, this is an interesting little graph of female judicial appointments as a percentage of all appointments. In terms of women, in the past it was abysmally low, but over time it has gotten a lot better. With Obama being the highest. Interesting. You also have, you also see it, and usually, you see this, generally Democrats appointing, having a higher percentage of female appointments to the court. And it's the same case with minorities. Generally speaking, the Democrats tend to have a higher percentage of appointments who are minorities. Interestingly, I think it's interesting how Clinton had a higher percentage of appointments being black than, say, Obama. So almost all cases come to the Supreme Court via the federal appellate courts or the state Supreme Courts. By custom, at least 4 of the 9 judges must agree to accept a case. This is known as the Rule of 4. They look for cases of constitutional significance or where there is significant disagreement among different courts of appeal. Of the 8,000 cases appealed to the Supreme Court each year, only a few hundred are dealt with and less than 100 get a full hearing and opinion. When the court agrees to hear a case, they grant a writ of certiorari, also known as a cert. If they refuse to issue a cert, they allow the lower court decisions to stand. If they remand, they send back the lower court's decision back for reconsideration. If they decide to go forward, the Supreme Court decides to take on the case. The court is usually in session from October till June. Oral arguments are usually held to exactly 30 minutes on each side. Each side can also submits written briefs, which are arguments with evidence citing relevant law and precedents. They can also other briefs can also be submitted if accepted or requested. These are known as amicus curiae briefs. They are usually arguments from lobbyists, civic organizations, and others who are not direct parties in a case. The Solicitor General represents the government's case to the Supreme Court. The 9 justices meet in strict privacy to discuss in conference. Each gives their opinion, starting with the presiding chief justice and working down the seniority order. They decide based on simple majority rules. Almost a third of cases are unanimous, but many controversial ones are 5-4. Detailed majority, which are majority opinions, majority concurring and dissenting opinions are published and are extremely valuable for current and future users. Majority is usually written by the majority. the concurring is usually made by someone who agrees to the majority but provides a different rationale for why he agreed to a majority, and dissenting is usually written by the minority justice, the justice who is out of the majority. And sometimes dissenting opinions later become the basis for a new majority. This is basically, the whole writing opinions is a way of making your thinking visible. So the current membership is John Roberts, Clarence Thomas, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Stephen Breyer, Samuel Alito, Sonia Sotomayor, Elena Kagan, Neil Gorsuch, and Brett Kavanaugh. Generally, the conservative wing is considered to be Kavanaugh, Gorsuch, Alito, Thomas, and sometimes Roberts joins them in, with the quote-unquote liberals being Breyer, Ginsburg, Sotomayor, and Kagan. So this is the current Supreme Court as it is, as it is. So this is a little bit of a trivial fact. If you actually visit the Supreme Court building, there are sculpture figures that are featured prominently. That are featured prominently in the building. These one chamber features a frieze decorated with a bas relief of 18 influential lawgivers, include Menes, Hammurabi, Moses, Solomon, Lycurgus, Solon, Draco, Confucius, Octavian, Hugo Grotius, Napoleon, William Blackstone, and John Marshall, Justinian, these are Charlemagne, King John, Louis IX, and Muhammad, which is very interesting. The fact that you have, which I find is very interesting. So that will be all for this video.